Welcome back to Down the Road. The gentleman I'm about to bring into our conversation is someone that, of all North Dakotans, probably knows the President of the United States better than anyone. He served with him for a long time. They're friends. They're individuals that, well, he's not going to give me his private cell number, but they have each other's private cell number, and that is former United States Senator for the great state of North Dakota, Byron Dorgan. Byron, good to have you coming down the road with us.
Hey, Joel, good to be with you today.
I want to talk to you a little bit about what you see playing out in Ukraine and how you see this all going. You know, we're 4+ weeks into this war initiated by Vladimir Putin. You know, we sat there in the beginning and America was divided. They were saying that Joe Biden was faking the fact that this was going to be an invasion just because of poll numbers and whatnot. In the end, it turned out completely true. What America was saying was going to happen did happen. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on how we as the U.S. have handled this and where you see it going.
Well, this is really, really a troublesome time and very difficult circumstance. You know, I've been to Russia. I've been to Ukraine. You talk about Joe Biden. I served with Joe for many, many years. And I've watched what he has done leading up to this. He has really worked NATO and the membership of NATO in a very significant way, and in a very positive way, I should say, bringing it all together. This is, ultimately, this is about Putin and about how the United States and NATO can deal with this man. I mean, he's literally destroying and murdering men, women, and children across Ukraine. And I don't think any of us know how this ends. I think it is the case, and as you know, Senator Biden is in Europe now and working with NATO officials. I think they're going to have to make some judgments here, perhaps, about is there slightly more risk they're willing to assess with respect to dealing with the air, because the missiles and the bombardment that's coming in the Ukraine is very dramatic. So none of us really, Joel, know how this ends, except there needs to be an off-ramp someplace here. I'm not sure how it gets constructed, but there needs to be an off-ramp that Putin and others believe gives them some way of describing this unbelievable mistake.
I want to go back to the beginning of what happened, though. You know, the intelligence that America brought forth, that was something that many people said, why are we doing that? Why are we showing our hand? Your friend, President Biden, went out there and gave that information to the public. Was that the right thing to do?
It was. And, the fact is, in most cases, whether it's President Biden or others, they never describe exactly how they know what they know because they're worried about, unmasking sources and methods and means. And so they're very careful about that. But I was surprised as well when President Biden decided to take what we knew from the intelligence side of things and tell the American people, look, here's what we believe is going to happen. Here's the risk of what is going to happen. And I think President Biden did the right thing. He especially, I should say, Joel, after the previous administration did a lot of damage with respect to NATO, even implying and suggesting NATO isn't necessary any longer, President Biden went to NATO leadership and really pulled it together. And now there is a very significant block of support from all of NATO trying to respond, sending weapons in and trying to respond effectively to save lives in the Ukraine.
I want to go back to those responses from previous administrations. And I want to go back to an interview that I saw with Condoleezza Rice because, George W. Bush, and these were the days when you were still walking around the halls of that Capitol. George W. Bush, when asked about Crimea and when asked about Ukraine going into NATO, he said, I don't know why not. I'm paraphrasing what he said, but as democracies, I don't know why that wouldn't be part of this process. A lot of people threw red flags up. And when asked by reporters and by, people like me that do talk shows, whether or not that was a good thing or a bad thing, Condoleezza Rice said that wasn't our best moment. And so in terms of Russia, in terms of their response to what George W. Bush put forth, did that start all of this, Byron?
I don't know the answer to that. I wish I did, but this country watched what Russia did, what Putin did, in literally murdering tens and hundreds of thousands of people, trying to recreate the Soviet Union. I guess that's what Putin has in mind, and that's why he's in Ukraine at the moment. So I don't, this is a circumstance where this is the first time, by the way, in I think 70 years, where a country that has a major arsenal of nuclear weapons has threatened to use them. That has never happened before, ever. And so I'm very concerned, obviously, because Putin controls all those nuclear weapons. This is a country by Russia. John McCain, I think, called Russia a gas station with nuclear weapons. Well, this is a country that has an economy the size of Italy or Spain. I mean, it's not much of a country. I've been to Russia. People out there in that rural area live in desperate poverty, desperate conditions. So, but they have these unbelievable nuclear weapons, and now they have a leader, Putin, who after all of these years has decided he's willing to threaten using them. That would be devastating for planet Earth.
Before you came on, I talked about, how we sit as a country now with NATO, before, where we were with NATO under President Trump, and the respect that we have for NATO and that NATO has for us, how the other countries that are in NATO. Do you think that things have changed to the point where we are the leader, where if we come in and tell Germany, you're going to have to live with less oil coming down the pike, where we look at some of these other countries and say gas prices are going to go up? Do you believe that, and I'm taking a long time to ask this question, but do you believe that NATO looks at the U.S. now again as the leader of NATO?
I believe so. I don't think there's much question in terms of what Joe Biden and his staff have done with NATO and the leadership of NATO, the leadership of Germany and France and all of these countries, Poland. No, I think this country has very substantial leadership capability once again. We're struggling. We're moving a lot of weapons into the Ukraine at this point. We're struggling to try to deal with all of the things that are happening in Ukraine, but and again, as I said earlier, I hope that perhaps we even take a bit more risk. I wouldn't want to take a lot of risk, but we need to consider taking a bit more risk to try to shut down some of this artillery and some of these missiles to the extent that we can.
You were in rooms where you were privy to information that some of us are never going to know. We're never going to know the intelligence and the information that was put in front of your desk. And you basically were able to absorb, help make decisions, and then not be able to share with the public. Right. I get that. I understand it. You were elected to be that person. But when it comes to what's happening with China, with the information that's going to come from China's potential involvement in all of this, how does that work? Because to me, what can be done with Russia, and this is a personal opinion on my part, and I'd love to hear yours, but to me, what the U.S. could do is still going to be based upon whether or not China deals itself a hand in on the side of Russia. And I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, you might know that I served on a commission on economic and security relationship with Russia, with China, U.S. and China. And so I've studied, I think I know Xi Jinping and know what China's doing and why it's doing it. But China is a very significant part of our future, for ill or for good. Probably more for ill, at least the direction they're heading with Xi Jinping. I worry very much that Putin goes to China and they put their arms around each other and describe themselves as brothers, and they're going to work together. Well, China has a huge responsibility here to engage with Russia in a way that says to Russia, what you're doing is devastating to us, to the other world superpowers, and the poor people of the world as well. And let me mention one other thing. The fact is, all of this, as you know, much of it relates around the issue of petroleum. If I mentioned John McCain describing Russia as a gas station with nuclear weapons, the fact is this issue of fuel, whether it's for Europe or for the United States or Africa. It's unbelievably important, and we need to get off of this addiction to have petroleum running our economic engine in this country.
That's a great point, or at least something that we as North Dakotans have to take a serious look at as well, because if we don't diversify what we're doing supplying energy, we're going to get left behind by the future economy. When you look at Russia and the threat of nuclear weapons, what's the trigger? I mean, what's a strike by Russia? Do we wait for that? Do we do what we can do prior to allowing that to happen? Because there's intelligence in regards to what Putin is doing, clearly coming out of Russia, that aids us in making decisions. And so you talked about nuclear weapons and whether or not he would use or could use them. What do you see happening there?
Well, I have been in rooms and listened to intelligence that turned out to have been dreadfully wrong. So I've been in those rooms with lead-encased walls and had, the CIA and others provide information to us that was just dreadfully inaccurate. And yet, in this case, with respect to Russia's invasion, I think this administration and intelligence knew a great deal about what was about to happen. But we have decided as a country, and I believe very strongly, that our country will never be a country that has first use of nuclear weapons. That ought to be our policy. No first use of nuclear weapons. We have never threatened the use of nuclear weapons. We would never use a nuclear weapon as a first use. Now, I worry about Vladimir Putin. I mean, it may not be strategic. It may be what are called tactical nuclear weapons, and they have some of those. Those are smaller nuclear weapons. So we'll see what happens. I mean, it is my desperate hope that we never again see nuclear weapons detonated on this planet, because once it starts, we have not been successful in stopping the proliferation of nuclear weapons. There are a fair number of countries that now have them, and we've got the most nuclear weapons in the arms of one autocratic dictator who's decided to go kill people in the Ukraine. And, we just have to desperately hope that we find ways to make damn certain that he never decides to use a nuclear weapon.
Were you surprised at how ill-prepared, ill-managed, ill-equipped the Russian army was, or is, I should put it?
I really was. And can I just tell you one other just piece of information? I had in my desk in the Senate, and I have it in my desk at home, a little metal hinge about that big around. And that hinge used to be on a missile silo in Ukraine. And that missile silo held a missile with a nuclear warhead that was aimed at the United States. Now, the reason I have that little piece of metal, the hinge from that missile silo, was all of those missile silos were destroyed, and all of those nuclear weapons were removed, and there's no nuclear weapon in the Ukraine. That decision was made. And where that silo existed, by the way, there are sunflowers that now grow. So isn't that a wonderful thing? Sometimes arms control works. In the Ukraine, there are no nuclear weapons because they were all taken out of Ukraine, and you can agree to that. And so did Russia and the United States. But we just have to desperately try to make certain that we're doing the things necessary to avoid Putin and others ever using a nuclear weapon again.
What about the role that American media, and when I say that, I'm just going to say it, Fox News is playing in making Vladimir Putin out to be some type of great leader, some type of hero. You've got members of Congress that are carrying what I believe is water for the former president, saying, you know what, this is not all his fault. I see it as aid to the enemy. Luckily, there's a man that you know quite well, Mitt Romney, who is pointing out that he believes this could go as far as treasonous. We in America send signals to Russia through some of our leaders that I have no respect for, that we respect him. I'm curious what you think about that.
I think it's just despicable. I think, Fox News and people like Tucker Carlson, who, by the way, in Russia, they're running Tucker Carlson's pieces on their news. And it's not, of course, news, it's propaganda. But why is Tucker Carlson putting on the Fox News channel here in this country things that Russia is using as propaganda in their country? He's dreadfully wrong about what he's saying to the American people. But it's not just Tucker Carlson, who I think is just an awful, awful person for what he's doing. But there are others as well. I really hope that someone will convince Fox News to stop this nonsense and understand that we're all U.S. citizens in this country. And maybe ask the question, what's it mean to be a U.S. citizen, and what's my responsibility as a U.S. citizen?
So let me ask you this, because this is what the right in this country is out there beating their drum about, which is if President Trump was still president of the United States, Russia would never have done this. What's your belief on that?
No, they're nuts. They have no idea what they're talking about. Who knows? In fact, as you know, Trump said that what he would suggest is, drop some big weapons on Russia and do it from airplanes that had Chinese logos on them and blame it on China and have Russia and China have a nuclear fight. I mean, Trump is so Byzantine. I don't know where his mind is, but it is certainly not right. And it's probably not even worth repeating the things that he's been saying.
But it goes into what you are pointing out is playing out on Russian TV. In today's world, Senator, versus, other times that we've seen the world in this type of turmoil, we have social media. We have the ability to point out, that Vladimir Putin is lying, that what he's doing is going out and saying what he's going to do by saying that's what they're doing. And so, how important is that in making sure that these journalists and these Ukrainians themselves are getting word out so that the world can see exactly what's happening?
Well, social media is a new, within the last couple of decades, and very significant part of all of our lives. And I worry very much about it because social media is creating a number of different truths, or at least what they represent as different truths. It used to be, that there is what's true and what's not true. Just tune into social media and you'll see that what Donald Trump has said, that the election was stolen, there's not a shred of evidence of that, and he knows better than that. He was told by the Attorney General that that's a lie. But, in any event, you tune in, you listen to that stuff, and you wonder, how do we function as a country if we're not able to absorb the truth, learn from the truth, and respond to it the right way?
Okay, so how does this end? And I know that's a prediction, but and it's something I certainly am not qualified to say, but I have my speculation as well after watching the Ukrainian people fight the way they're fighting and fight with the armor that we're giving them to fight with. I understand that, but where do you see this going? Do you see military action in the end being used by NATO?
I don't know. I think we'll know more about that today. Obviously, NATO is continuing, and the United States as well, is continuing to send a lot of weapons into Ukraine. The Ukraine fighters have been extraordinary. I'm very, very impressed and very surprised by it. And I just don't know where it goes, but our country needs to continue to show leadership and work through NATO and make decisions with NATO. It's not just about us. It's about us and NATO. And how we want to respond to Putin and how we want to respond to this slaughter that is occurring and how we must respond to the slaughter that is occurring in Ukraine.
Okay, one last, as long as I'm throwing speculative questions out there, just a precursor to something that you're going to look at me and say, why the heck are you asking me that? But when I see Vladimir Putin, I see a puffy face. I see a man that in the background is getting some level of pressure by the oligarchs and by some of those individuals whose lives he's turned upside down. Where do you see things happening with him? I know that when I get up in the morning, I try to find out whether President Zelensky has been killed or not by the Russians. What about Putin himself? Where do you see his future with the Russian people? And, with all these sanctions and everything else going along with it.
Well, it's very hard for anybody to take Putin on. As you know, yesterday, I believe it was, his major political opponent was sentenced to 9 additional years in prison with a fraudulent claim by a court. And so it's very hard to take him on. I think some 10,000 people perhaps in Russia have now been arrested because they were demonstrating. But, it is the case that Putin is not likely, I think, to be overthrown. That would be the best thing, is if the Russian people would throw this guy out and take over a different kind of government, but probably not likely to happen.
Senator,
the question will be, when does Putin believe that he's not going to be able to do what he wishes to do in the Ukraine and find some sort of face-saving way out of it.
Yeah. Senator, I could do it all day. Thank you. I really appreciate your time.
That's good to be with you, Joel. Thanks for what you do.
Senator,
we probably upset everybody here, but at any rate.
Why? By being right? By telling the truth?
No.
If that gets us in trouble, then we both have long lives. In terms of, I'll take that trouble, Senator. So I appreciate it.
All right, Joel.
Yeah.
Thanks.